Okay, Kernel Building Kernel, Friday, 4th November, end of KB7. Today we have a pretty full agenda, which you can find in the meeting notes as per usual. I will drop them in the chat in a moment. And you'll find there also a beautiful quote from the end of the algorithmic information theory piece that sums kernel up and suggests that it's really just about living a good life, which means, writing concise programs, no matter what kind of programmer you are. And those concise programs can be very well understood as those which need no extra information to know when to stop, by virtue of some kind of balance of the whole or rhythmic harmony. We cease execution when it is appropriate. A very beautiful and deep idea, I feel. So, today, I wonder if we can perhaps begin with Brennan. If you would care to talk a little about where you think the priorities are based on your organization in the Miro board, because we lack Salim and Boyana today. And then perhaps we can throw it open to everybody else. Just once we've contextualized a little bit what has happened this week and where we are going.
Sure thing. Let's see. I was going to try to share the Miro board, but I haven't shared my screen in Zoom in a long time, and that interface is scary, so I shan't. In terms of the problem statements that we went over last week, and for context, people who weren't here, Boyana and I kind of collated all the research that she did through her awesome interviews and everything, and tried to boil them down into like these problem atoms or problem statements. The goal here is for us to be able to like have clear, actionable nuggets and like a strong scent of information, to borrow language from Simon's wonderful onboarding links last night, for contributors. So I went through last night and I marked these. The star is my guess of, this involves more development work. Maybe it's a bit more technical. And the pen is, it's very contextual. And we can probably address the issue primarily through the use of copy. And my hope is that, Andy, you and I can talk offline about it too, of just, the degree to which you want to cast these out into the wind. Whatever you're comfortable with, I'm comfortable with there. So however I can like best get these into the hands of people. I think the biggest ones really come down to the onboarding that Simon talked about, and this can serve as a good transition over to that next piece. Because we can change copy, but there are some dev things in terms of the user's expected a home button in the top left. The user is expected not to need to log in when switching between the subdomains. They were confused going to the portal in the middle of the application flow, and they kind of like expected a more satisfying gameplay loop closure after submitting their application. So these are all like fairly small things, I hope, from a development perspective. And I think the main thing here is like the bones of the system are good. It's just about like contextualizing it, because it's a slightly different structure than people are used to. So some of that context is going to happen through code. Some of it's going to happen through writing. And I guess all of it's going to happen through code because it's a computer program. But yeah, I think it was encouraging going through last night and rereading these with a week of distance and realizing like these aren't actually that big. And like once we address these, I think like we have a really cool thing on our hands. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Simon, do you want to just give a little bit more context there on user onboarding? Who are we waterboarding? Why are we doing such things? How can we get people towards the sort of do-centric stuff that Andy Matushak is talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brennan. Yeah, I also had a chance to read through them, and I already addressed, some of the logging issues. As always, there's going to be more, but navigating through subdomains is, I have to log in, and yeah, we increased the timeout, the default timeout, to 24 hours. So there shouldn't be any issues with being locked out during the application process. There is, however, because yeah, we're using the non-standard login on the application page, so that is the only app that's not automatically logging you in. So that's something to address. But I think it's related to yeah, what the bigger question of, oh, why am I going, yeah, between application and the portal, and what is kind of that landing page that we directing people towards to, and that was sort of really what was on my mind, obviously, and is a larger question that's not, yeah, something that I can solve in isolation, because it's, yeah, it should be a discussion, obviously, and that's really, I think, um, yeah, if we think of it as just the onboarding experience, then I think that's the right way of framing it. So that's sort of the way I've, in my mind, I phrased structured the problem. So, and I think part of that is really about, you know, how do people get to basically discover the kernel? And I think it's, it really starts at that point, and we can kind of look at, I think there's two ways mainly how people start the journey. It's somebody, sending them a link, or somebody organically discovers it through, social media presence, and they mostly land on the syllabus, I would say. So, but yeah, that's sort of how, and obviously have a few ideas on how I think different approaches we could take. But I think, yeah, I would just really want to open it up as a discussion. Um, and I think, the onboarding will help set that context, right? And I think right now there's just multiple ways of kind of entering the system. I think that causes a lot of confusion. So yeah, we can maybe start with, should there, what's the predominant way of how people should be, creating their wallet and kind of entering the ecosystem. I think that would be a good place to start. And then, we can kind of address also, what's the language we're using? Is it, yeah, how corporate versus playful we can be, and that what that journey should be. But yeah, so that's sort of where I come from.
Brennan.
Yeah, I just linked one of the teardowns from useronboard.com, Simon, in the Zoom chat, because I think it's a great empathy exercise and like historical throwback for how far we've come as a space and like an industry, but then also the ways in which we haven't at all. Because it's just a really funny thing of the user starting from Google and trying to just get some Bitcoin. And so I really like the format that they took and the conversational flow of that teardown. And I think, I don't know, I don't want to speak for other people, but it did change the way that I thought about user onboarding. So as we're looking at these things, the user tests are really good. And they're very, very helpful. But I think we can also ask ourselves, like, just did that make sense? Like what I just saw happen? Like, what's the least clear way that could be interpreted from an end user? And then, it could just be little tweaks. Like the person, and once they finally found Coinbase, they're like, oh, wow, I'm getting really good at just clicking big blue buttons. This is really satisfying. They felt confident because finally they had a consistent user experience pattern of clicking big blue buttons to get Bitcoin. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting, and looking at the patterns that we're creating between the apps and within the system, so that users can build that habit and that confidence and kind of a UX flywheel effect.
Thank you. Yeah. Let's hear from some others if you're willing to test the waters here with us. How would your ideal seamless flow into kernel look like? That's really the question that I hear Simon asking, and I might be badly misinterpreting that, but like just apropos of nothing, if you like just what would be the best way to feel welcomed to kernel?
I guess there's nothing, if I can champion the analog, there's nothing quite like one-to-ones. I mean, if there's some way that you can encourage an early bumping into someone else, then let's encourage it. I know it's difficult to regiment it, but perhaps it's just as well we wouldn't want to regiment it. Just see how serendipity wends its way. So that would be my main and only contribution I think I could make.
I think I can pick up on that. Hi everyone. Guides. I mean, I don't have a clearly formed thought here yet, but I started thinking more and more, and yesterday, just in general, about kind of revamping, upgrading the guides scenario landscape. But yeah, thanks.
Perhaps following on to Philip's point, one thing, the application is much simpler and it's beautiful and great work. First of all, the question on the link, I think about how like each interview is premised on the idea that, you know, if everyone just reads the same thing and is interested to talk about it, that's really all you need, is like to have read that link. So I don't know, it's interesting, like thinking about maybe even in the sub framing, like you could suggest like the link to the song or the poem or whatever being something that yeah, could be shared with others so that they know, so that it encourages dialogue. I like the idea of the encouragement of dialogue from Philip, ultimately, is really what I'm saying.
Simon, would you care to? Because the truth from me is that I don't have good ideas about this, and I am actually genuinely interested in hearing what you're thinking. I agree. So like anecdotally, from the 4 people who did find the apply button, 2 of whom I've spoken to, 2 of whom I'm chasing around the internet in a really fun and funny game of song and dance. These people, like one of them was referred, the other kind of found it organically on his own, and they both noted that Kernel felt more inclusive and like a place where they could learn, and that was why they had like gone through the process and like kind of just been like, oh, okay, whatever, wallet, application, do the thing. And so like it seemed like both of them had spent a fair deal of time like looking at the website itself. So I know that you mentioned that earlier, and that's like one of the findings from those chats for me. I wonder what you're thinking here. That might stir some more ideas from other folks too.
Yeah, I think we, I think we do have an opportunity to kind of steer people down, a certain path. And I think one of the things I think we talked about in the past that really resonated with me is making it a little bit more playful, right? So it's more of it's more of a little bit of a journey where you kind of unlock next steps. So in a lot of the findings, the onboarding, what's certainly popular right now is sort of, you're doing sort of mini tasks, and you have like it's like where you kind of unlock next steps. So you would kind of be, and it's very much in line with what Sal's been proposing as well with more of the wizard, but in terms of how we kind of structure that as the overall experience, that's leading you down that funnel, and how playful we want to be. Like, is it more like a game where there's certain quests you have to do, and things we talked about, maybe you do have to go to the faucet and get some girdly, and show that you did certain, you spent some time, right, maybe also reading through the syllabus before you are unlocking the application, and that the application is much more something that you're finding as opposed to something we're pushing you towards to. And there's a little bit of attention, right? That's there's a hurdle. So there's a lot of people who are going to be really busy, who are not going to do these tasks. So that's sort of what I'm trying to tease out, is like there's this tension between making the application flow like as simple as possible, where it's like, oh, just take a picture of me and click a button and it takes 2 seconds and I'm done, versus like, hey, I actually have to put work into this. I have to set up a wallet. I have to educate myself what a non-custodial wallet is, and some of these basic concepts, to kind of use that as a filter to like, do you truly want to learn about these concepts? So that's that tension that it's really something that we're setting, and I understand that those are conflicting goals. If you're trying to maximize applications, then you want it to be as simple as possible. If you want to kind of focus on learning, people helping understand those concepts, like a non-custodial wallet is a complex concept. You can't just cram that. If somebody has no idea what it is, you can't just try to have them do it in 30 seconds. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, and where's that tension, and how much do we want to invest in making it simple versus people really having to do some work.
Glenn.
I have two maybe analogs that might be interesting to explore for this. And I do think a lot of it has to do with kind of the relationship between like inside kernel and outside kernel to this point, like what that application is, which I think is what we're kind of going around. So one is just the idea of like a house in some ways, and like how do you invite someone into a house? How do you talk to people outside of that house? And what are the kind of affordances of these kinds of relations? I think it's kind of to Philip's point of like, what are the ways that we can engage as humans with people before they hit this kind of the door and they have to throw their application through the slot? And what's the ways that we continue to talk about that? And I think that leads to this kind of second analog, which I think you've often heard me talk about or think about kernel as the decentralized university in the sky kind of thing. And if I think about what are some of the affordances that universities use in these cases, I think there's some that we could lean on. And so, the idea of, tours, for instance, of prospective students that come and have folks give them a, here's what the university is. They answer questions about what this thing is. There are times where you can show up for those tours and talk about what this thing is and help people understand and answer their questions about what to expect. And on top of that, I think, one thing that might be helpful in some of this, and it might be helpful also with just the kind of crazy fury of the beginning of the 8 weeks of like all that it goes on, is something like a course catalog or something that points to, hey, this is what the calendar looks like for this next term, and you can think about how that might jive with your own responsibilities, and and also understanding that this is, I think the more people think about this as 8-week course and not a lifelong thing in some ways. I think it does a disservice to what kernel is effectively. But like, it is this way of focusing of it, it starts feeling like to some as like, oh, is this like a YC like experience where it's an accelerator that gets me X, whatever the thing is. First, like you're joining a community that then you will continue to learn with over time. And so I think some of these things can just give us different tools as we think about it, as to like, what are the ways we greet people outside of our university and tell them about what it is, and is there a way to do that in this kind of more human way, even if they're chats or it's Gather or it's other places where folks can come and have info sessions or something like that. Maybe those are things that we can point people to, and then I think the more we can point to like what that experience is, beyond the detail of, I think we have some of that on the website, but I wonder if there's more we can add to that to flesh it out. So those are just a couple ramblings, but it might be helpful analogs.
I love it. One thought here from me is that I don't think that we're in the space of trying to optimize for as many applications as we possibly can get. And I think also that anecdotally through kernel, people who don't have like at least some time to engage in the program tend not to like benefit as much as they could from the program, nor contribute back to like the peer learning environments in like the most positive and wholesome ways that we've seen. The like introducing like more like care and time into the application process by gamifying it, by having steps that you have to do. And like I think that like when Simon says gamifying, what I'm hearing there is like you have to like get some girly ETH and you have to like deploy your own contract on girly. Like these kinds of things can be like simple, so they can be simplified to a great extent and made into like a pleasant and like surprising experience, right? Like the old Latin dictum for teaching, docere et delectare, right? To show and delight is a wonderful way of thinking about that. It doesn't have to be like some fun graphics. It can be like actions that people take. There is like the tension for me here, Simon, is not so much between like optimizing applications, these sorts of things. It's like a question about, some of the people who have like added to this like this ineffable like flavor of kernel over the years. I worry about like if we would lose them in such an experience. So like the people that come to mind of this for me are like Sister Tebebwa or like Christina Trouts or like these kinds of folks, even like somebody like Harold Davis, although like I think Harold would get through a non-custodial work, no problem, because he's like a big part of the Stacks ecosystem. But perhaps at the time when he joined Bless or the same for Daryl Jones, like these kinds of people who have had like a really big impact in the community, it's them that I wouldn't want to lose in the application process. And it doesn't matter if there's more time, because I think that those people have the time, the care, and the intention to do it. It's just like if Sister can get through our like game, then it'll be successful for me. And it's because like I think that like filtering out by time is actually a wonderful thing, because it's mostly like these people who like don't have time for what we're doing anyway, and that's fine. Like that's their life and path, and that's like it's actually been one of my frustrations anecdotally, that like we accept a lot of people who seem really, really good in terms of what they write, in terms of the application, in terms of the links that they drop, in terms of the way that they interact in interview conversations, and then they just disappear. And they disappear not because like we're doing anything wrong or because they're bad people, just because like they don't have the time required to like navigate the fire hose that is kernel Slack, and then like find comfortable niches within that they feel are really generative. So as long as that's in our mind, then I'm happy.
I plus one to all of that. I really think Sister is like a great example of that for the application process. I do also want to recognize, we have things that we will definitely be retroing on outside of Kernel Building Kernel about just that fire hose and what it is. We know there are reasons why it can be overwhelming. And I want to make space for that too, for why, some people join with the best of intentions, but the first week is just too much. And then they lose it. But yes, anyways. Cool.
I want to double click on that time thing, Andy. That's a big thing for us, like with ATX DAO, because we're also kind of a curated community where people apply. And there's the enthusiasm of the application and like the cultural alignment within the application correlates to an extent with like what their journey looks like after they're in the community, but like way less than we anticipated. So I'm really curious, like if you just mean not trying to hide the complexity of kernel in the application process and like not trying to remove all the friction and edges, or like to make it as fast as possible so that the people with the time and willing to spend the time are the ones completing it? Or are you saying, or like getting at something deeper or different?
Yeah, I'm happy. It's just like that it takes a little bit more time, and that acts as a good litmus test for those who would likely have the time during the block. As long as like the time taken is not to like navigate needless complexity and try and find the scent trail of meaning again. The time taken is to like do stuff, like actually just do stuff, right? As opposed to being like, where is the Bitcoin that I want to buy? Why am I here? Right? Like that's the distinction I want to draw. Like the other link that Simon shared is like, that Twitter thread, like it presents how there's like 9 actions that people can take, and they're like, what's really cool about it from a design and UX perspective, right, is that like as you take each action, there's like an interactive element that slides onto the canvas and shows you how to do it. And so it's all this contextual guidance as and when you choose to do the task, it's there. It's like, off you go, right? And yeah, I don't think anything's perfect, but yeah, it's like time as in 10 tasks, not as in 5 tasks of like, like, why am I here and what the hell are these keys? And there's no further information, like, good luck to you. That's not what I want.
And maintaining that strong scent of information so that, and like that, I like the idea of the application game or that playful intro. If it is like getting some girly and deploying a contract, maybe their application is inside the contract or something, who knows? That's not a good idea because it's on chain, but exploring those creative things for them to do to check for both time and engagement and enthusiasm, and then the 3 qualities that you have in the new review criteria.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like it's this kind of stuff that like is most exciting for me, that you wouldn't put your application on like in a contract on chain, but like you could, for instance, like deploy a contract that like has a particular identifier or talks to our application factory. And if your wallet has done that, then the like, hey, tell us who you are, and like, would you like to schedule a chat with like these ongoing conversations that are happening in kernel? Like, here's stuff going on in the next 3 weeks. Want to join us for one of them? Like, that's the kind of thing that seems really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that we're asking for, right, is things like, oh, express your interests, or those could very well be part of an NFT, right, that you deploy, and then the content of the NFT, that would be the thing that will kind of express your interest, right? So you could take those things, you could make it in a way where it's not anything personally identifiable, but still, an expression and kind of a signal for what you're looking for. But yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, I personally really like that direction. I think I'm trying to, maybe if we bring it, maybe is there anyone against it? Maybe I would love to hear from Trisha. I'm not sure you're able to speak, but since your background in UX, I would just love to hear your thoughts. But I'm not able. If you're not able to participate, that's perfectly fine.
No worries. Happy to jump in. I've been just kind of writing in the chat liberally, so have put a couple of thoughts there. Just I think for me, the things I was kind of touching on in the end is how do we set context for people? One of the examples I pulled from, I think one of the profiles we filled out in Kernel was that question around how do you see the world? And for me, that kind of helped me see that the context of the profile I was filling out was actually quite different from a different type of profile that I was doing in other applications. So I think a big principle of UX is meeting people where they are, but also understanding the context with which they bring to the things that they're seeing. So I think if someone were to come to the application, see that it was a form and know that it's a gate to enter into, an exclusive, desirable community, they're going to bring that context with them. And when they see links, they'll be thinking that that is a link for them to put forward, their best version of themselves. So my thinking is there a question that we can prompt or get someone in the state of mind? And I don't think it necessarily needs to be a full different experience, but just kind of help them reimagine that next question. Like, if you had to describe your life, would you use a song? Would you I think kind of leading that context into the next question and then share that link. So I think that's kind of what I was thinking about, because typically people don't read. Like when I just quickly went through the updated flow, there was a lot of descriptions, but knowing the average person, and again, we were talking about time earlier, most of us will kind of just glaze over that and click. So I think it's how do you set context in a way that people can digest and realize it's a little bit different than what they're used to in the past. And then I think I really enjoyed the discussion around, what are the characteristics that people like Sister were able to demonstrate early on? How do we not block people like her? And so I even think that's worthwhile of thinking as we look about the application, because it's not the evaluation we would typically do in a different community. What are some of those things, and how do we create quick checks for those things that we do recognize has value within the community? So I think it's because it's an unapplication or an unprofile, how do we deconstruct the idea of what an application is for what our purposes are here? And then how do we simply set context for people in a way that also shows them this is not the typical application? So some of my ramblings in text were all about show, not tell. And I think it's really around context setting without making someone read that this is not the typical application that they would fill out, because it's not a typical experience that they would have on the other end as well. So those are just kind of the things I've just been hammering away at in the chat as
well. Trisha, you're amazing. Please, if you have further inspiration about how do we deconstruct the application, just let us know.
I think I think for me, part of it is what makes Kernel special, and what makes the people in Kernel special, and then how do we better filter against that in the application, and then lower the barrier for people who typically would not come through because they think it's your traditional application. So it kind of stems from that for me. I like that. I just am following the chat. Vivek was sharing, we're not really strangers. It's a card game, but I think typically card games are games where you call bluffs and games where you do all this stuff, but there's context setting in that game where it's actually really like a discussion. It's like table topics disguised as a card game. And I think when I talk about Kernel to others, it is a much more thoughtful, intentional community than just like a bunch of people trying to network within each other. So for me, the application is how do you filter for more people that want that kind of experience and against your hard, heavy networkers? And then how do you ask prompts that would kind of indicate to somebody that this is the kind of experience you would get? I think a heavy networker, if they were faced with like a philosophical question, would be like, oh, that's kind of out of place. But maybe someone like Sister would be like, oh, this is perfectly in place. So I think for me, it's that. And I do think context comes from the way that information is presented, and rather than like the heavy blurb that someone has to read beforehand. So yeah, those are my kind of brain dump of thoughts right now, but obviously happy to help brainstorm.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic. The other thing you mentioned in the chat was sort of, what's the value they're getting. So I think, yeah, I think that would be the other flip piece, right? Sort of, oh, why am I going through this process in the first place? And I think that's sort of that perception of whether, it's an 8-week class versus, kind of long-term community. And I think right now, I certainly also had more of the perception of the 8 weeks rather than the long-term thing. It's kind of how it's presented right now on the landing page.
For sure. And last thing I'll say before I shut up, because I've been talking for a while, I do think, Alan, you wrote something that I was kind of commenting on earlier too, which is the positioning of an application implies that's like the first level of context setting, where it is you are trying to get into a community. And I think, what we were talking about, playfulness, I think that's great, but I think that to a new person, they still understand that there's some kind of evaluation process that happens before they can. And I think that's what kind of creates the feeling for people to have to put their best, and in often cases where there's an application involved, most professional foot forward. And so I'm not suggesting we remove the term application, because for all intents and purposes, it is an application, but it's like, how do we create the sentiment of what the application is really for? And it's not necessarily being evaluated on other criteria that historically people are evaluated on. So I just think that I don't think we can get away from that, because for all intents and purposes, people are applying to join the community.
Yeah, such a subtle balance. Alon, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in because I was tired of writing. I completely agree with Trisha. I was just wanted to make sure that I meant externally we should definitely use applications so we're not confusing anyone. And it's definitely the term that is being widely accepted. But internally, I think we can kind of extrapolate from a different word instead of application. So our thought is not bound by this, but the meaning of the word itself. That's all I wanted to do.
One of the other things that I will try and draw out here is we've been looking a little bit at, like we did like a big affinity map of just like a whole bunch of different kernel fellows that we've interfaced with over the years, and then have slowly been trying to like draw some empathy maps, and from those empathy maps come up with personas, Trisha, for like, oh, who are these people that have like really interacted in interesting ways with kernel, and how can we better like craft the experience to filter like for them, as opposed to like networkers and particular kinds of VCs, one might say. And it's interesting because there's so many different people that have contributed in like many different ways. It's quite difficult to like come up with like a core set of personas, although it's like something that we're doing and will continue to, because I think that it's a valuable exercise. One idea that I want to try here, and I'm a little bit nervous because it's recorded, but I'm just going to say it anyway, which is that like one common feature that I think is kind of true for most people that have really got more involved and who seem to have both like got value out of their experience in kernel and given value to others while doing so, is people who are either like going through a major life transition or who have suffered enough already. That's my like high level overview. That like it's the people who see have already had like their perceptual filters shattered a little bit by something, either like a life transition right now, or like difficulty and experience prior to joining kernel. Those seem to be like very common threads amongst like everybody. I'm not saying that every single person has like fits this particular thing, but it's just very interesting for me when I reflect on it. It's like that seems to be like a very common marker. Like if I was being a little bit more positive, I said like the doors of perception have been cracked a little bit for all. But that's maybe taking it a step too far. So that's what I have now. I don't know if that sparks any further thoughts for folks in terms of the games we might play.
It makes me reflect on my own application experience. So it was right after I left one job, my first job in crypto, and I was very disillusioned about the space. And I was considering leaving product management entirely and getting a master's in data science and just like really rethinking like my career and everything. So I went back and I saved my responses to the kernel application in a Google Doc. I went back and read them, and I was like, whoa, this is like a totally different person. But I kind of had to like go through that in order to come back and reintegrate into my career and change its path a little bit more towards community organization and stuff. And like, I think that was like the perfect time for me to fill out a kernel application, because it asked me like these really important questions about where I was at. And I don't know if that, like the benefits of being in that transition came through in the application, because I read it and it was like, wow, this is kind of like all over the place. Like, I don't know how to really pin down this guy and understand him. And like, it would be a struggle to see like how he thinks about like interfacing with this community and what it like, how it all fits in. So I don't have anything like general to say, but like how that maps onto my experience is pretty interesting. I don't know if that brings anything up for other people too.
Yeah, I guess when yeah, this is actually when Andy, Vivek, and I went for a walk, we ended up asking this question of what was a deconditioning moment or event in your life, and I wonder whether, in kind of Trisha's comment of like, how does an application feel not like an application while still also like helping filter in certain ways. And I wonder whether there's a way to ask in that process about something like that pulls a little bit more on those experiences. And I wonder whether that can be both a signal to the applicant of what it is that we do here, as well as potentially a filter for how it is people answer those questions. But yeah, no, I'd love that framing as to how much has someone already been deconstructed out of the kind of mainstream, especially the more Silicon Valley capitalist way of going about things.
Yeah, I really quickly just I really appreciate, Brandon, your comment, and Glenn, yours as well. The module asking better questions is coming up in my head, and I even today, just to put it out there, as I was creating an application so that in theory soon maybe I can help the reviews. It was to get to the review step, but
that's only if we let you in, by the way. Just
exactly. But the question is, are like, well, not even the question. I felt it even in this application. And I just want to call that out. Even with like 5 minutes to do it, I tried to pause and tried my best to answer the questions, because I'm at a particular moment in time. And it was a meaningful experience to try to put my best foot forward. And I want to, I suppose, emphasize that was nice for me today.
Philip, would you talk just a little about micro-solidarity in small groups? Because it does play into like a discussion we've also been having about like teams versus individuals. So fascinated to hear.
One of the things that digitally mediated community is relatively unprecedented. We've only had it for a few years, although it feels like it's been around forever. That's because it's in our generation as opposed to all the generations that came before us. So we're sort of captivated by its ability to have us jump out of this lovely little Amsterdam street and join new people all around the world. It's like teleported, fantastic. Woo! But as you know, real life has a way of sort of getting in the way of, for example, sticking with a kernel syllabus through 8 weeks. One of the phrases that I've always sort of just loved is that, you know, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And there's this idea that if you come to something with your mates, by which I mean, you know, just 2 or 3 others, not a whole rugby team or something, that perhaps then there's more of a sticking power, because you can, or you don't have to think, well, is there an Amsterdam group? That happens to be, because I'm in a world city, but lots of people aren't in world-renowned cities, and therefore being able to just go out your front door and meeting others in Kernel is impossible. But not if you came with a small group in the first place. When I was first writing about decentralized autonomous organizations, conceiving of what we now know as DAOs as middleware, this was very early, just to be clear in case it sounds naive, but it was 2014 or something. I chose the name bread because it comes from the same derivatives as company. Company having its origins in breaking bread with others. And so in terms of squads or micro-solidarity, I had this idea of companion groups, which were not digitally mediated in any way, shape or form necessarily, but they just contribute to a variety of DAOs as and when their particular collective expertise is needed. And they move as a group because they just love being in a team, as we all do. So there's this, and I'm pretty sure that if I asked everybody on this call, can you name 1 or 2 others that would be in your team, none of you would struggle. So I guess I was just thinking, what difference would it make, maybe KB9 or something, if the application process was for, I was going to say threesomes, but you know what I mean.
I mean, I think we just changed our entire direction and will now optimize for menage a trois. Thank you for that.
It's just a thought.
There was a team application, if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, what has your experience been of like those fellows, and like if there were different patterns around their engagement because they joined as a group?
Yeah,
but that they also might be joining as a company, and that could also be a different thing where it's more of that incubator feeling. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very much the case. I'll give some anecdotal evidence here, which is twofold. The first is to say that I agree with Philip, and we have the concept of groups already kind of baked into the infrastructure. So I think it's possible to do this kind of stuff. The data from Kernel so far suggests some interesting patterns and trends, though. The first is that a lot of the folks who sit in the 10th decile, the most engaged, do come from like team applications. For instance, Sister was part of a team when she joined. Jad Esper is from Kudos. He was part of a team. Jordi Jensen, an incredible teacher, lecturer from Den Haag, was part of a team, Koyos. Andros Wong, part of a team. So there's lots of these folks who are all parts of teams. What's really interesting about it, though, is that generally speaking, only one person in the team like sticks it out. And I don't think that this is necessarily, Charles is part of a team too, right? I didn't want to say because I was looking at the Disco ball, but exactly. And what's interesting is that like one member of the team tends to be like super engaged and everybody else much less so. It's almost as if like they're the sort of tip of the wedge and they like take the fire hose front on, and then like I think others sort of like benefit from it. That's the sort of anecdotal discussions that I've had with these kinds of folks. They're like, oh yeah, no, Gerard was definitely like looking at like what you're doing and looking especially at like the code that you were writing and benefiting from that and like learning from it, but like wasn't as engaged in the actual conversations, discussions, this kind of stuff.
Out of interest, Andy, how many of those teams do you know are local, as in geographically local? I don't know if that would make any difference.
Yeah, it's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know. Anecdotally, probably half. But
I
don't
gotta
know.
jump in. My battery's gonna die, and I just finished my groceries, so it's good timing. Yeah, the team experience for me, I mean, a lot of things were different in KP2. Yeah, I didn't know about Kernel except through my co-founder partner at the time, who was friends with someone I think in the Genesis block. And so I came in through her, and sure enough, yeah, I mean, that's the quick version is, yeah, I did stick it. Thanks.
There you go. Yeah. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, is the truth of it. And it does, like, what I am fairly confident about is that, like, generally speaking, one member of the team takes a lead role, and while in a block it seems like the team itself might benefit because the information gets like passed on and filtered through to the rest of the folks, but then in terms of like ongoing relationships, generally speaking, only like one person from the team sort of sticks it out. Which, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see. Draw our own conclusions from there. But the concept of groups is there. I think that, like, being aware of micro solidarity and like doing stuff with other folks is nice. It could also like be a part of the game, right? Like, step 8, deploy your own ERC20 token contract. Step 9, exchange a token with a friend. Send a token to a friend, receive a token from a friend. That kind of thing is pretty neat. Step 13, build an AMM on Girly and exchange your token. We'll get it. I'm just kidding. We'll get Kernel block 10.
An idea I had earlier about like part of that game is, I don't know how open sourced some of these generative art algorithms are, but helping people, like thinking about like, okay, well, we don't want to put the application on chain because obviously there's PII, it's really sensitive, all that. But if you essentially encrypt the application into a series of generative artworks and have those minted as NFTs, and it's just a picture or something, I don't know, but that'd be interesting to explore, like the ways to make the application more playful, the ways in which we can make it artful, without people necessarily needing to have any particular technical skill or whatever. Like that could be a good way to measure that engagement and fascination with the kernel process of like looking at their life and their background and what's bringing them to kernel as a piece of art and like trying to make that art beautiful. I don't know, that might be something interesting to explore.
Yeah, beautiful. We have just a few minutes left. I know that many have to drop at the top of the hour. So if you have further thoughts, I know Alon, Brennan, and Trisha, if you all want to get together and discuss some of this, please do that. Trisha, it's very clear that everybody here loves you, and anytime that you have to think through some of these thoughts, particularly about like deconstructing applications, but meeting users where they are and not breaking their expectations too much and giving them the context that they need as they need it, that stuff is just like so critical for what we're doing at the moment. Charles.
There's just something in my last 2% to underscore about the guides, and again, I don't have a clear further thought, but just like there's something there to connect up with the KBK stuff. Yeah, in some ways. I look forward to that.
Yes, it does. I agree. And yes, Brennan, KBK continues. Schedule. Yeah. Yes, it never ends.
Good. I was about to get really
you
sad.
laugh now as a
Like,
celebration, but
I looked at my calendar and I saw 8 of 8, and I was like, no.
Okay. Any further last thoughts while we are here? Simon, was this helpful for thinking through like some of what you might tackle next week?
Yeah, it's great to. I think I love all the ideas, so I think that's great. I think and making it a little bit more specific, I think, is would be helpful. So maybe Brandon, I can reach out to you as well. And I think basically what it's always this right? How much are we changing from the status quo, and where do we kind of draw the line? And what is good enough? Where are we saying like, hey, we're not holding everything up, right? And that's sort of my biggest fear is, while I love, going on this route, the playful thing, I'm worried that, I just want to go and rewrite everything, and starting from scratch, and obviously that would, just in terms of the timeline. So that's my biggest worry is that, how much can we just say like, okay, this is good enough for, the next set of people to go through. And then I think it's the same kind of question about, is it kind of like a continuous thing, how it's set up right now, right? That people can just kind of trickle in, or is it, is there a window where the application button is not available? So I think, just kind of for us something to further clarify on what that means. And again, yeah, just, then how does it, we can start putting a link on the syllabus, right? If we want to start driving some traffic to see what comes through, that obviously would be a good way to do it, right? Just to link to the production wallet. So.
Yeah, like as I think about this stuff just in my head, it's really like a case of if there are like steps to the application process, right? Then it can be continuous. And what I really imagine is that you get to like step 8, join a conversation, right? And that can be always open, right? Because there's conversations always happening. You can just like come in and join a Junto, or like whatever's been organized that week in Go. And then from there, it's like based on the feedback, and I don't know how that feedback happens, but based on the feedback of the people in that conversation, do we want to continue talking with this person or not? There's like a step 9, join the block, right? And like that join the block, we have to understand like what are the things that come with joining a block. It's probably like access to the block calendar, which has firesides and other like lead events, and probably like, even though I want to reimagine how guilds are scheduled and run, like access to those guilds, right? So those are like the 2 like big events things that happen when you like join a block. The blocks run like for some specific period of time, some specific number of times per year, and that's like that 9-step join the block might be like, we might remove that from time to time once we've got like, say, like 300 people who have joined the next block, even if it's only from like, even if it is only scheduled to start a month from now, that step 9 is grayed out until that block is run. And then like, once the block has begun and we're in process again, then we can like have that become available again, so you can join the next block. But you can still be at step 8, participating in conversations, that kind of thing, right? That would kind of be my suggestion at this stage. But I haven't had a great deal of time to think about it this week. That's kind of just a rough outline of where I'm at on it.
Yeah, that's great. It's also more like, yeah, how willing are we to kind of, rethink the concept of how it is now versus, sort of these alternative approach. So I'm glad to hear that's something we're considering as well, because I think it's more in line how it's kind of set up right now, and I think that'll be wonderful to move in that direction. I'm not sure if people. I have a few more minutes. I'm not sure, Andy. Do you have to run? Do you have to?
Just a super quick comment on that. In practice, that's how it happened with a few of the referrals that I ended up bringing into KP7. They had already been coming around, even in the summer, to conversations.
Yeah, exactly. As always, Charles is the wellspring of many of our ideas in these difficult to trace but delightful ways. So yes, I have this slowly brewing in my head, Simon, as a proposal that I will write, because that's the next. I've now been breaking your mint tab for too long. I'm like, cool, I've done enough of that. Now I want to go and break proposals. That's where I'm going next. But please, I know you have further comments here.
No, that's great. That's great. And I know this is also very much in line with how Sal's been thinking about it, and I think it's been, you know, a long-standing discussion of ours with, you know, how the Convo kind of plays this integral part, and moving that over, you know, to make it part of it. So I feel like, you know, yeah, it should be part of the application process, right? Or the process of becoming, you know, part of the kernel family is certainly having a conversation. And Brennan, to your point about, yeah, I do think there's extreme, you know, value in you know, having a collective group, right, that meets together at the same time, and we certainly don't want to lose that. I don't think, yeah, I'm definitely not suggesting to lose that. I'm just more suggesting that, you know, it's like seasons where, you know, things just kind of happen, but when you join, right, it doesn't have to be exactly then. It's just kind of like there's these moments in time that we meet together, like, you know, Fridays for the KVK, right? These kind of rituals that you form, and that's sort of how I see Convo and events. And I think you know, a lot of these events can be bigger. You know, a guild is sort of similar thing, or, you know, a fireside chat is a similar thing. They just have different kind of properties, but it's sort of like, right, the thing that's unique to them is, or common, is that, you know, it's a certain point in time where people meet, and what makes it special is that it's, you know, that you are meeting at the same time and you're making that time. I know Charles has more. I'll always love to hear your insights.
I'm just in the door and breathing hard from my heavy groceries, but a funny story, which you guys might have noticed. I haven't made it around to too many of these sessions, but a friend of mine came, I think it was last week. I don't know if he spoke or if you noticed, Gyuri, Gyuri, and he was also on our Wisdom Jam, and he's a special Hungarian friend and builder. But he was on his own volition, poking around the kernel website and found the conversations and found his way in. I just wanted to let you know. I heard about that.
Very much the intention. I'm really happy to hear that. Delightful, man. Glenn.
One other quick thought on this is just around the groups concept, and again, like just leaning on the analog of universities, and you know, that moment of everybody arriving on campus to the Slack is really wonderful and energetic. But there's usually some work in advance of that to give you some basis of like who those folks are, who, you know, maybe it's folks that you've come in with that you knew before, but I think it's also like things like roommates, for instance, as like, you know, or setting up ways of people coming in as a group, that they have met with others from their kernel class in advance in some way, right? Whether it's some way of like, I wonder if that also then ties people more to the community of kernel, with others in a group than coming in with some other objective with an existing group, for instance. And so I wonder if there's more, you know, this is not exactly kind of applications, but I think like that process you laid out, Andy, I thought was really lovely, right? If you come into these conversations, you join the block, and then, you know, how do you keep then, what is it to join that block and start connecting in advance of the rush? And so that maybe there's some pieces there that are, you know, it's less kind of application flow necessarily, and it's more just like there's just a stream of how you start getting connected to the people of kernel. But yeah, I like the way you framed it though, of like, how do you keep plugging people into more and more conversations effectively?
So.
Oh, that's great. I was just seeing who else is here. Juan, I know you've been here, and I always love to hear your thoughts if you would be willing to share how you think about it. talked about it in the past. And yeah, appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, we started for a second. Something specific, Simon, or I'm sorry.
Oh, it's asking Juan about just his experience, and but feel free to
It's
share
giving a
yours
second.
too.
Just mind the mic.
I'm going to jump in a moment, but I did want to just in my role as fluffer before Juan jumps in is it's just such a pleasure to be back with you guys, and the thoughtfulness of this crew as you think about these things is just always it's so refreshing. It's such a relief to be with you. So yeah, thank you guys, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you, Glenn. Go well.
Hello. The way I think it could be interesting to allow for people to start interacting. I mean, it already happens in a way in the convos because we can invite anyone, but people to be able to start interacting with what is kernel without being like officially part of a block, you know. And in a way, the more they're interested, the more they will keep on coming back until at some point they're like just part of it. But I don't have anything more precise to say other than that.
No, I love that. I mean, I think we are saying very similar things. And I think what the other thing I know we talk a lot about is how we can kind of support more pseudonymous conversation. So I think that would be the only thing that you haven't really thought through about. I assume we're mostly talking about, hey, we're sitting in a Zoom meeting and we're having cameras on and we're having a conversation with a group of people. Just sort of what the policies are. Yeah, not having cameras on. Does it have to be a Zoom meeting? So yeah, just kind of how we think. If we're excluding too many people, that when we're selecting, for a certain type of person.
Kind of all depends. I don't know. It's like really case by case and relationships and vibes. That might not be a useful statement, but I will quickly answer.
Yeah, it's useful because a lot of it comes down to context, right? It's like, and that's actually what ultimately is interesting, right? What keeps people like most engaged and coming back is like, wow, here is a group of people who stay in context with one another and with whatever is being like discussed, even if like the content of the conversation meanders off into some like tangent. There's some like horizontal context. The whole point of like horizontal conversations, right, is that like there's like some essential context which is laid, and then like the conversation and the interactions happen on top of that, and they can wander wherever they want. But like yeah, how you encode that, and then the sorts of cultural precedents that you set in order to enable that to unfold in different environments. And that's particularly something like why I mentioned that idea of a niche, right? It's because like I think that like Meowy's vibe calls are wonderful because there's no cameras, right? And then like I also think that other like Kinder Kernel or like these kinds of places was wonderful because there were cameras, or like the Movement Guild is also wonderful because sometimes there's cameras and sometimes there's not. And it depends on the kind of exercise that is being done and the kind of like practice that is happening. And like sometimes Marlon takes it to an extra level where he starts like messing around with like what's possible with cameras, and you start seeing the camera as like some sort of performative space, and it's like it's that kind of thing which makes it difficult, right? Isn't it, to say like one or the other? But
so I just got, I don't know if I totally stepped on you too hard, Andy, but I got excited. So I was going to bring up something about the interviews and interview process and some ideas that I had. Actually, I started making templates in mind map form to kind of manage the process, also with the multiple interviews and scheduling. But what you were just sharing just triggered something else, which was to bring all of that into the interview process, actually, and even maybe a game or playfully and mindfully aware, of course, and all of that. Maybe that could be somehow bundled in, or woven into the interview process. But yeah, just to kind of put a flag up that I do have some interesting stuff I'd love to share with anyone who's sort of into and involved in that interview stuff. And then just further to something I put in the chat about the Convo tool. I have some ideas and real questions around that as well. So
Yes, well, please put the thoughts about the interviews and the thoughts about what you would like to see in Convo in the Kernel Building Kernel channel. Especially like what you would like to see in Convo is like going to be very, very useful for our work over the next month. And
keyword
like thoughts about, yeah, just like even like feature requests, just like throw them at us, basically. Like just all of the feature requests that you would want in your ideal app, tell us what it is, and that'll be very helpful for us. We're saying the same thing on interviews, right? Which is like fundamentally this realization that we run more convos outside of kernel blocks than in kernel blocks, because we do more interviews like prior to the block than during the block. And those interviews are specifically around the syllabus, which like the convos that happen in the block around the syllabus are few and far between, and they're not well attended. And that's crazy, right? Like it's like not a good way of like optimizing our efforts toward like teaching what is in the syllabus, gathering people around it and using. So like what happens if those convos are like parts of the block or parts of what is going on in kernel, and then like external people as they are applied and go through the process are invited to them. That's like Salim's whole, like that was one of his big contributions. He was like, this way of doing things, y'all are insane. And like, yeah, so it's like less interviews, just more ongoing conversations where like a few new people who have been through the application process show up, and then you can give like further feedback on those folks. That's, I think, very much where we're trending.
I don't know if this is a radical idea. It probably is, and I just have to hear it, how it sounds in the air. First thought was to record, but maybe just to straight run through order, all of the breakouts and all the interviews, and they with their understanding going in maybe somehow, and then the stuff the cream that rises then could actually go into the syllabus, and then they get rewarded in different ways, including coming into kernel. There's something I had to hear how it sounded.
Okay, Miriam, you've been so patient with us. Is there anything based on our conversation today that you would like to share? Any insight that has particularly stood out for you? I know that you were moved by the idea of invitation as opposed to application, but I wonder if there's anything else that you would like to share before we call it a day.
No, I'm not sure. I feel like the combos before knowing if you're accepted or not already happened. Like, I feel like I was already getting the vibe of what was going to be like before. So you might be already doing a good job there. I'm not sure. That's it.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That is useful, truly, because those kinds of anecdotes help us know that we're probably mining along a rich vein.
I wonder if there could be a way to move a bit beyond the binary of you're either in or out, of more like a spectrum of belonging or something.
It's a beautiful phrase. I love that spectrum of belonging. The term I tend to use for the convos is semi-permeable, sort of that way for others to come in and those in to go out as well.
Yeah, I think the way we are sort of the way the permissioning is designed actually is sort of these concentric circles where it's essentially you get a number. Right now it's 2000. It's sort of arbitrary. You can just go higher, but you get a certain higher number, and then as your number gets lower, you essentially get access to more things. And Andy can talk a bit about it more eloquently, but that's sort of the idea behind it, that it is a spectrum. It's not like a binary thing that, you know, you have access to everything or not, but it's sort of like the way we set it up is essentially you kind of earn the trust of more things, and then you kind of evolve to the outer circles. And outer circles always encompass the inner circle. So we can reflect that in convos as well. So if you know, we have that granularity to determine both, like, what, you know, how do you get a lower number, right? What makes you promote to a lower number, and then also like what allows you access to or what's the lowest number you need. What's the lowest number you need to be able to access?
There was something really quick I just wanted to bring in, just going back to, I was in the grocery store, and but it was something I wrote in the chat about the source of anxiety and stress being that people started worrying about that almost right after the block started, and thinking that it, you know, it was going to end and they have to say goodbye, and it was all this sort of heartfelt goodbyes, and I'll be succinct, but just something more and clearer somehow up front, because whatever was there, which I'm not specifically aware of, was missed largely. It was a pattern that I heard a lot. So I just wanted to say that. Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
That's good. Yeah, very much a part of all of this. So wonderful. I think that's closes the perichoresis, the circular dance for today. A wonderful and very, very deep word, that one. So thank you very much for being with us. I am going to stop the recording here. I have